Hi everyone, we're here another week at Mutant Gods, and since we're doing this show in Halloween, nobody should know this right now. And we're gonna do it on vampires and uh, generally horror things through the X-Men. We would love to see some comments about what is your favorite spooky vampire horror theme in the X-Men and or other mutant comics. And here with all of you, I'm Duna, and we have Travis. Oh, I did it right. And and Gabriel and Ross. Whatever. So well, first of all, a shout out to our sponsors, Frankie's Comics and Lemon Juice Comics, which are two comic shops that have a lot of great variant covers selling and everything. And some of them are very spooky, so that's on season. And also, I think that's mostly it. The Black Lives Matter movement is still going on. There's still protests going on. That's pretty much much more important than Halloween. And we support it from here. You can find more information at blacklivesmatters.card.co. It's easy to find in the internet. And well, here we go.
This week on Mutant Watch.
Hi, back. I think Gabriel was gonna say something when.
I was just gonna before we got into our awesome new intro. I was just gonna remind everyone that if you are one of our American watchers, to vote. There's a lot of early voting that starts ending soon, and then election day is Tuesday. So do your civic duty, people.
Okay, so yeah, that's pretty much very important right now if you are able. And okay, so to start today, what I'm gonna ask you all first things to talk is generally what are your favorite things in spooky things, monsters, vampires, etc. Why outside of the X-Men, like just to get into what is the relationship of everyone with this them, if they have a relationship at all. I don't, as you can see. And, okay, so what all you all think about that and the possibilities of this kind of stuff in, media. And who wants to go first?
I'll go. It's vampires for me. I mean, growing up, I was obsessed with Anne Rice's Vampire Chronicles. All of those books, which I read backwards. I tend to read a lot of things backwards. It's the weirdest thing. But I read Queen of the Damned when I was about 15, and it left a hell of an impression on me. And from there, I mean, the first thing I ever actually bought at a genuine comic shop, it wasn't actually X-Men comics, although there were some of those, but there was the collected edition, painted edition of all 12 volumes of the Vampire Lestat comic from Innovation Comics, the signed editions, and that was actually the first comics I actually bought from a proper comic shop, and I've still got that collection today. So for me, it's definitely vampires, and I've always enjoyed vampires in the X-Men as well. One of the first X-Men comics I had after the Brood Saga was the Sienkiewicz issues of Storm and Dracula, which is one of my favorites. So definitely vampires for me. I'm cool with the mummy and the ghouls and demons and things like that, but I always come back to vampires as my favorite. Next.
I'll go next. So when it comes to like the spooky genre type stuff, I've actually always been a sucker for werewolves, and which I don't think has had too many crossovers with the X-Men, aside from that one Maximus Lobo, Chuck Austin weirdness. But yeah, I've always been a bit of a sucker for the werewolf stories myself.
So I'm an easy mark for anything kind of spooky or creepy. Things I've been thinking about lately. Duna, I showed you the Len Kaminsky Hellstorm last night. And, in the early 90s, Len Kaminsky was really the best horror writer that Marvel had. He was on Morbius for a while, and he did a lot of stories about addiction and self-loathing with Morbius. He went to Hellstorm. He did what was probably the first explicitly gay story at Marvel, which was about internalized homophobia and a woman who is in hell because she thinks she belongs there because she's gay. And that was a huge thing. That's like 92, 91, 92. Marvel didn't have a gay kiss for another decade at that point. So it was a big thing there. As a kid, Exterminators was one of my favorite X-Men comics. It still is. The original Spider-Woman ongoing series was pretty much a horror series. All of her supervillains tended to be weird stalkers who sewed up people's faces or things like that. So those sort of things. I'm an easy mark for any of it. There's a whole run of Keith Giffen comics or Pet Shop of Horrors where I just fall in love with things. So I actually have the Lestat comic somewhere in just out of arm's reach here. It's the trade, but it is. Really? Yeah.
There's Derek Gross and John Bolton at their absolute best, in my opinion. Very much so.
So I guess it's my turn. You're gonna be surprised, but it's vampires too. And so I was always interested in vampires since I was just very little. I almost never had a lot of fear associated with that. I usually don't like to be afraid. I only like to be afraid it's just like for some reason. Just like, you're gonna tell me something or you're gonna make me question something, then I love to be afraid, but just like for the sake of not. But I love like monsters as a stand-up for usually queer things, because it's most of what I have internalized and learned with that, and most of why I recreate on these figures. But pretty much there's a lot of issues that get touched on vampires, and I find a lot of them very interesting, like addiction sometimes, or generally some sort of also mental health stuff or going out of war. I like that. And as for media and comics and etc., I love the old Vampirella comics. That's like a big thing for me, especially the ones where Catherine Jeffrey Jones was doing the art. I thought that art was just really like, I don't know, existentially cool. I don't know. I just find it like very depressing in a great way. And that's what drove me to this branch of vampires in comics. I have read a lot of Fitz Vampirella. I'm not reading it right now for reasons very clear, but I have been following it all the time. And as for X-Men stuff and vampires, since just that's what's gonna connect with the next question, I think what most I like, and because it touches on some of these things, not all but some, especially the addiction thing, is Bluestorm in the Mutant X alternative universe stuff that I can't remember who wrote it right now. I had it in the back of my head, but I'm remembering. So what are your things that the three of you like more about spooky stuff in the X-Men? We can get more into certain concrete vampire things later. We can start with spooky stuff. Whoever wants.
No, there's a couple of things. I mean, the things that jump to mind immediately when I think of sort of spooky X-Men, I think of Necrosha. I mean, it's a very, very dark series. It's all dark at night. It's, the style lends itself very much to horror. I mean, all the variant covers were were spins on vampire movie themes, from The Lost Boys to, I can't remember all the others, right? The Dawn, Dust Till Dawn, and I mean that always jumps to my mind when I think of spooky stuff and vampires. I also think of Wolverine and Going to Hell. I think of Inferno. I mean, I think of those what if issues with Wolverine as Lord of the Vampires. I mean, also, what if the X-Men had lost Inferno? I mean, there's some pretty horrific things in that comic. I mean, the Goblin Queen and takes over the Earth, and I mean, they feed Wolverine babies. I mean, those kind of things leave an impression on you when you're like 15, 16 years old. Those are the things that spring to mind for me.
I am so maybe it's because I'm not as heavily into the whole spooky things. Like, I don't read the comics specifically, like the Anne Rice comics, things like that. But I actually like it when they integrate the kind of those supernatural aspects into the main comics, like the entirety of Magic's background and kind of going a little bit more exaggeration, like Spitfire and her background. I'm a big fan of when they kind of get integrated seamlessly into the general narrative.
Yeah, I mean, Inferno was huge for me. It was I was into X-Men for Inferno basically, and then like the Australian era didn't do anything for me. I like the art occasionally, and I kind of dropped back out. But Inferno was big for me. I think because it had scary parts, and particularly Exterminators. Further Adventures of Cyclops and Phoenix, I really like. And, that had a big kind of Sturm und Drang kind of energy to it that I really appreciate.
Mm.
Other X-Men things, I like when there's small amounts of horror or when there's that crossover, like the Cross-Time Caper. And we always talk about the Cross-Time Caper like it's a big comedy. And that's scary as hell by about halfway through, thirds of the way through. It's very desolate Nazi Earths and this sort of thing and manipulations. And I think we forget that. And then you read it again and you're like, your soul drops out of you a little bit.
Yeah, if I even think about my favorite X-Men thing, which is the Brood Saga, I mean, that's very much predicated on the Aliens movies, and that's horror in space. I mean, the Brood as characters are horrifying. I mean, they're xenomorphs that are intelligent and lay eggs inside you. I mean, there's that whole horror aspect to it as well. I mean, the set when the Brood come back during Silvestri's era and the Outback era, those are very dark comics.
Yeah,
I mean, they are very horror orientated, actually, if you think about it.
Legion Quest, there's the scene where Legion pretends to be his father to seduce his mother. And I actually got thrown out of, I forget which group, but I got thrown out of a group on Facebook, X-Men group, because the admins insisted that was not creepy, and I was making it creepy. Mm-hmm. And, it's disturbing. It's meant to be disturbing. But, yeah, they threw me out of the group for posting about that.
Yeah, that is a definite different kind of creepy. Beyond the aliens and vampires, it's just bad creepy.
Yeah, I can actually connect that creepy anecdote to one of my favorite horror things in the X-Men, which is the X-23 run by Marjorie Liu, which pretty much branches out from Laura's history in NYX. which is the volume 2 of NYX, which is a very horrific comic in very real ways. It's not so much about supernatural horror, but it's much about the horror that people have to go through to survive. In the case of Laura, is mostly it's self-harm and sex work and a lot of other stuff that she deals with her. And my favorite spooky or more like horror thing is that X-23 run that picks up from NYX story, and it has Sana Takeda on art, and it's I think the second X-23 run by Marjorie Liu. There are 2 runs. I think it's the second one, and it starts with Laura having hallucinations, and they're pretty much about hell. So it really draws like this whole thing about the horrific or her processing the stuff that she has gone through, and that's my favorite because it felt really. It felt like a dim so harsh to touch in something like comics like hallucinations and stuff was being handled pretty well, and I don't know, I found it very connecting with me, and it was pretty much all blood through like 3 pages. Like 3 pages was like all covered in blood. I have it somewhere, but I couldn't find it today. I don't know where I have it. That later connects with Jubilee going into, I don't know if that's how you pronounce it in English. Jubilee, right?
Jubilee?
Jubilee, okay. Jubilee going into that, like meeting Laura and then forming this bond about Jubilee being like, I am a vampire, but I don't want to like succumb, like get too much into that part of me, like get away, but that horrible part of me, and that connects deeply with Laura, which is like someone designed to kill, but that hasn't really has those desires on control. And you can talk. Someone was gonna say something.
What I was gonna say is I agree. I like how with Jubilee and X-23, the way they relate, they're both these monstrous people, but just because they are monstrous doesn't mean they need to be monsters. And what that looks like for them and how they can find that road working together.
And that's exactly what they do in that run, if you think about it.
Yes, that's what I was gonna say.
Which is set in Paris. Which is in Paris. It's set in France. It's in France. Yes. It's in Paris, if I remember correctly. Because what comes to mind is right at the what comes to me right at the end somewhere is, there's a splash of X-23 jumping off a building. It just comes to me, and I can think of the 2 of them walking through the streets of Paris, talking and arguing back and forth. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that one. I have read it 1,000 of times, and I think I have talked about the 2 runs. I thought it was only the second run, but I think it's the 2 runs of Marjorie Liu. The second one is the one in which they connected with Jubilee. I just remember it.
Yeah.
But it's, I don't know. That's what's my favorite thing. It has not so much vampires, but it has some pretty real horror, and I love that because like sometimes horror is like this thing that is all detached from reality, and I prefer if it's like very into reality, even if it's more difficult to manage. That's how I process it. But anyway, so now on to vampires. What we could talk about, it's one of these things with vampires. We can start in I don't know, but I think the first time that vampires got over to X-Men was in the Storm and Dracula stuff in the Uncanny X-Men. I don't know, but I think yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It was, so if you have all something to say about that, about sexy Dracula.
Yeah, it's interesting because at that point still it's traditional Dracula. He's still in the cape with the collar, the black hair, the goatee. You know, much later we in the Curse of the Vampire, he's changed. You know, he's got the white hair, he's clean shaven, he looks more elvish. But you know, what's interesting to me about that comic, yes, it's got Dracula and he bites her and everything else, but it's a story about willpower and the power over one's own body and everything else. And it's actually a very powerful story there. And you know, they use Storm as the metaphor for somebody that has the willpower to stand up to Dracula. And I mean, it's always been one of my favorite issues. I read that one constantly. I mean, it's aside from the fact that it's Sienkiewicz, but it doesn't look like traditional Sienkiewicz because he's been inked much cleaner than, you know, the stuff he does where he does all the artwork later. So, you know, it's really one of my favorites. I mean, I wouldn't say it's not a super scary vampire story per se. I mean, it's got some traditional elements in it, but I mean, there isn't the graphic violence that you get much later in the vampire stuff with Blade and everything else when the X-Men stuff later. It's actually it's a more sort of, it's meant to be, I don't think so much. It's got that scary horror element without being over the top, frightening and bloody and etc. etc.
Well,
I mean, that's what somewhere in the 80s.
I think I came to that issue. It had been out for quite a while when I came to it, and I think I came to it around the same time as the Excalibur issue that is a parody of it, where they have locked up Nightcrawler because they see his fangs. And there's several callbacks to that earlier issue there. And so for me, it got even lighter because as soon as I was introduced to this nominally scary issue, I was also introduced to a parody of it at the same time, if not exactly the same time. And so it's always been hard for me to see the horror aspect of it, I think, as freshly as maybe somebody that read it, you know, when it came out or immediately.
Okay.
So my introduction to that Storm issue was also pretty background in that I first found the kind of Generation X sequel-like issue they did, the 1998 annual, in which I actually don't even think they call him Dracula in the issue, but Dracula comes after Chamber.
Mm-hmm.
And it has some of the themes, but just seeped in the general teen angst that is Generation X's brand. And while I wouldn't really call it spooky, it is a dark issue, since what it mostly deals with is Chambers' fact that he doesn't have a face and how it affects his life, and just kind of him trying to accept it in a way that isn't really accepting, just living with it.
It is a gorgeous issue, though. I know when I came to it, it was black and white reprint. So in my head, it's a black and white comic. I know, obviously it was in color first. So I know it's black and white. But I'm fascinated still, and I used to get so angry when I was younger with Storm and the kind of aristocratic men that Claremont especially loved to put her with and have this sort of tete-a-tete. And Dracula, there was the Doctor Doom thing, and then she turns out to be a robot in that. And he liked to do those kind of things with her. And it used to make me really angry. And now I look at it and it's just kind of fascinating, in terms of, I don't know what about that character spoke to him that way. And I'd be very interested to see an interview at some point where somebody kind of, not drills him on it, but just asks him, what was the motivation?
Asked him about it.
Connection. Is it the tiara she's wearing? But I was thinking they did technically have a vampire earlier than Dracula, but it's not a vampire. We had Sauron, who was the energy vampire.
The psychic vampire.
I don't know if, when Sauron was around, I don't know if Marvel was allowed to use vampires at that moment, or if the code was still knocking that sort of thing off.
Yeah, good. Yeah, that's a good point.
But we did have the psychic vampire, and he was drawn with that kind of classic horror movie actor looks at the time. Neil Adams doing the art. So
yeah, it's kind of like a Harvey Korman like horror, kind of like a Harvey Korman horror special kind of feel to it, to the character design.
It's weird to think about that comics couldn't allow vampires, blood, and violent stuff and queer people in that weird list until some year. One thing that I find great about the X-Men comics bringing Dracula in, the couple of times they have done that with this Storm issue and later with Mutant X and later with Cures of the Mutants stuff, is that since this is public property, like it's not licensed, anybody can use Dracula for anything. They changed the character a lot and its motivations. Like Ross says that the looks from the motivations, the characterization, they changed like they wanted. And I don't know, I find this. I don't know. I find great that this character can be used by anyone in any story, and it's like it's not that it's not canon. It's canon anyway. You have a Dracula in Marvel. You could have a Dracula somewhere else. And I don't know why that was my reflection on this run, but I love the issue. I think it was pretty simple, like the Last of Love stuff. But I found it great because it's like this idea about vampires being like this sexy thing that I found this very interesting. I think sometimes it can be problematic and it can lead to people putting vampire heroes with less and less clothes with time. I'm obviously talking about Vampirella there, and but it also can be, I don't know, I find it interesting that people always relate vampires to sexuality and
eroticism and homoeroticism.
Yes, that.
I mean, it is for me because that for me, vampires were my first encounter as a teenager with homoeroticism. I mean, that's kind of what drew me to, Anne Rice's books are not by any stretch of the imagination steeped in it, but it's there. And it was my first encounter with it. And that theme carries into a lot of things, from comics to comics and every sort of media with vampires. There's that fascination with the connection between that intimate moment of biting another person and sharing blood, etc., etc. And I mean, it left a massive impression on me as 15, 16-year-old still figuring out things about who I am, etc., etc. And I mean, and it's always stuck with me. And I think that's why I'm always interested in vampire stories, is to see some of that, whether it's in X-Men comics or in other media, to be quite honest.
So before we have another vampire theme before the Mutant X stuff. We probably have some more. If you remember something that is in the middle of the stuff, tell me. But the next I remember was this few issues in X Factor that had rich vampires that suck on people. I don't know if any of you remember that one. It was like X Factor 54 or something like that, and Archangel, who was called Death at the time, was like attacked by these vampires, which basically were a club of rich people sucking on people's blood. Like they were really like these super rich people that have parties in like these big houses and etc. And they have like a cult stuff going on with they have to suck the blood of more people, and whoever does that wins. And they decided to go through to Death, who was Angel Archangel at the time, was called Death. And I don't know, I find that interesting. It was in the Louis Simonson run. I love those issues very much. and they touch on something that is usually not so done with the vampire. Them, I'm sure they were called vampires, explicitly called vampires, but it was like more of like people who manipulate others in society to get to a higher level or something like that. And it was interesting, but I don't know if any of you all have read that. But I
No,
think
well, I don't, if I have, I don't remember.
I kind of barely remember it, but I don't remember the details of it.
I am fairly certain I've never seen that before in my life.
so. For the people watching, I mean, there are much better things on X Factor, but if you go and read everything of it, you're gonna find vampires at some point, and they're gonna be like obnoxious white rich people.
Was that a Wheezy issue?
I think it was 54, like near the end of
Yeah.
Louis Simonson run. Like the end was at 60 or something like that, so it was like near the end.
I know she likes vampires. I mean, she came out of black and white vampire comics earlier, but also when she was on Superman, they had vampires semi-regularly. I think she just likes vampire stories.
It's just like, how can I do a vampire thing here?
Can
Well,
I
Angelis reads. Okay, so
Yeah, I was just checking on the internet here. I mean, I see a cover. It's got introducing the mysterious menace of Crimson, and it's got a lady like with her hand around the dude's neck, draining him psychically, kind of thing. Yeah. So yeah.
okay, so the next thing I remember, it's in 1998, and it's the Mutant X comic that was gonna be a limited series, and then it was extremely popular, and people demanded more, and there was more of it. And it's by Howard Mackle, Tom Raney, and Andrew People, if I'm not wrong. It also has a colorist. I need to remember a colorist. I will remember at some point because the colors are amazing. But anyway, this is like the appearance of Blue Storm, which is a storm but a vampire. And the run is based on Havoc dying in the main continuity somehow. You know, he's gonna come back. And Havoc dying in this other universe, and then switching places. And this new Havoc finds like this war in which the X-Men are someplace run by Magneto, and they're very scary and dangerous. And his mates are the Six, called the Six, and they're like, I don't know, like very goth, not vampire, very goth mutant team, and it has a Storm as a vampire. It only has a Storm as a vampire, but Dracula makes some appearances here too. And I don't know if you all know about this run. I love it. I especially love the issue after it didn't cancel. You know, it became a regular continuing series. That it was the 13th issue, and it was about the story of Blue Storm and with Kitty and Forts, and it was cool. I don't know what you all think about that one. I probably will say more. I'm gonna find who was the colorist.
No, I really liked that series. I kept up with it for the most part while it was coming out, and it was really fun to see, you know, the different variations. And we had a beast that looked more monstrous in there, and Bloodstorm. I think
And
Howard was freed up by being an alternate reality, but there was also a lot of nostalgia, especially when you're like a young comics nerd. You know, you love when things call back to earlier issues. So I liked that aspect of it as well.
anyone else has anything to say, or I can say some things. By the way, the colorist is Gina Cohen, which sends to later colored comics for Valiant. Her style is pretty cool. It's like very dark and I don't know, very like a goth colorist. I love that because it's very unusual for me.
Yeah, it's a beautifully drawn series. It's highly stylized, and the colors really. I mean, if you think of that era of comics, I mean, as far as X comics go, it's actually a shining example of really good art and highly stylized art at the time. I mean, Tom Rainey is the art is brilliant from issue 1 almost all the way through. I mean, it went to 32 issues eventually. I mean, and right towards the end, Dracula shows up, I think, with the Beyonder and everybody else to try to destroy the Earth, if I remember correctly. It's been a long. I mean, I haven't actually literally read that since it came out. I mean, I enjoy Maddie in that as well. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Maddie, and she, as the Goblin Queen, and she's pretty good in that too. And also Warren. Warren's quite right. The horrific character, him and Beast. They physically they're very different from how they are in the 616, and they are quite horror orientated. Warren's wings are more bat-like or demonic, etc., etc.
Yeah, I remember the most horrific part of those comics was actually Maddie and Archangel, like and Warren. It was like very much about they were trying first to dominate the world, and then they were playing with some very scary stuff. And I remember that was the most scary part. I find very interesting that the issue 13 that has the story of Bluestorm, in the cover it says, because you all demanded it, the backstory of Bluestorm. And I thought that was very funny, like people demanded the backstory of Bluestorm.
Yeah. I don't know, maybe I'm cynical, but in my mind it was like, this is selling. We need a spacer to actually plot the next arc out. Let's do an origin story in between, just so we can give ourselves some breathing room, because that's. I mean, maybe I'm cynical. I don't know, but that's kind of what it felt like.
Possible, because that issue was written by Ben Rath, not by Howard, so it was like a change of writer. There was 2 issues that were not written by the original writer, and then he came back. So probably it's what you said. It's like, let's fill it up with something. But I think it was a great origin. It has Kitty Vampire Hunter. That's like great. And later she's also like, don't call me Kitty, call me Catherine. And it's like, wow.
Yeah.
I don't know. She's very cool in that. And Forge is lame, but in a cool way.
Yeah, it goes against the grain of what we were used to seeing, but it does it well. And it does it consistently well all the way through. And lots of fans talk about that series. I mean, I've never gone back and revisited it. I mean, I started and I didn't finish, but it's left an impression on everybody because it's extremely well put together.
And also, a thing I really appreciate about it is that even if Storm is a vampire, that doesn't change her character deeply. Like, she doesn't kill. I'm not gonna spoil how she does it, but she doesn't kill. And she is pretty much concerned about everyone close to her. We have a lot of issues that deal with what I feel is a metaphor for addiction, with how she comes to that point. But in that point, it's pretty much like, I don't know, a character that isn't like demonized by being a vampire. And that's great, because like I wouldn't want a change in a Storm that was like, it feels nothing like a Storm is just cool, and it's not that. It's the opposite. It's really well crafted, and she feels pretty much like, if vampire had become if Storm had become a vampire, what could that look like? But without,
it's organic.
Yes, without making it that doesn't feel like a Storm and her ideals and what she goes by. And I don't know if anyone else have anything more to say about this series. I thought it was incredible, and especially I love the colors.
I want to reread it now. I picked up an issue. I have my issues here downstairs, and I've picked one up once in a while, but I haven't gone back and reread the series or any long stretch of it for a while. So, just to jump back a little bit, I was wondering, somebody that is more familiar with the X-Men annual with Dracula may remember better than me. I'm wondering how much they maybe got away with in terms of erotic body language or closeness to other bodies with Storm in that issue. In my memory, there's a lot of her leaning over other people, as you do in vampire stories. But I'm also thinking early 80s with Storm, you didn't really let Storm have sexuality that way in a typical X-Men issue.
No, definitely not.
And so I'm wondering, do you remember? Is it more in that issue, or is that my head telling me it was?
Yeah, I honestly can't remember, but I mean, they do. I mean, going back to the original Sinkovich issues, they do play with that. Okay. I mean, there are several panels where her body language is very not like Storm. Okay. So there's a big splash, and you've got Dracula's face, but Storm's face, it's a side profile, but there's this wanton, she's got her head bent up like that, and with this sort of half smile. It's quite wanton, and the chest is also pushed up very much in some of the other panels. So, I mean, they have played with that body language, making it
becomes a vampire there. It's like, less so with Storm, because Storm is just like the original story is more like about things that she feels are bad for her, so it's not so much sexualized. But with Gambit, I remember there was a lot of it. If I'm not wrong, but I might be reading too much gay into it, it was with Gambit and Warren, maybe. I think that was the leaning over moments there, but I may be putting something there. I excuse myself in case I put too much gay into there.
There's no such thing as too much gay.
Yes, true.
What was that James Asmus thing with Gambit, right? We all see that in Gambit because we all want that in Gambit.
I mean, because people try to write it a couple of times. I'm not sure if there, but in other places.
Yeah, okay. It's...
So now that we somehow went to bisexual Gambit here.
It's always a good time.
It's one we already have had, but it's nice to go back to it. So I think the next thing, if I'm not wrong, well, maybe it's the Apocalypse and Dracula thing, but I haven't read it.
So before Apocalypse and Dracula, back in 2000, there was actually a one-issue story in Generation X about Monet St. Crew as a vampire hunter in some private school. Yeah. And I honestly have no idea why she was not present in the annual when they all went up against Dracula, but they actually make a reference to that issue and how she needs to do it on her own. And it ends up leading her to joining back up with the X-Men, with the Generation X. But the specifics of the issue are all very hazy. I just remember that cover of her in her Generation X costume with the stake in one hand, and that the school was just utterly infested with vampires.
That first Gen X run had a few horror one-offs. Mm-hmm. They had the one, too, with the nightmares, where it was like Freddy Krueger and Jason. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I'm trying to figure out why she was not in the follow-up, but they do mention Monet. And I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know why she had left or when she had left. I just know it was in 98. I think that was after we found out that M was not M, but M was twins, and M was Penance, and then M was M again, and that whole thing got confusing. but I don't know why she wasn't in that annual.
Interesting to note that if you're talking 90 and 1998, 1998 is the year Blade came out.
Oh.
If you think about it.
Yeah.
But Duna, you said what you think might be next is the Apocalypse versus Dracula. I did read that. I was actually a big fan of it, but it is an odd concept. It's weird in what it brings and how it, despite being Apocalypse and Dracula, they spend a lot of time without Apocalypse or Dracula on the panel. It actually follows the ancestors of Chamber and Blink, who are revealed to be descendants of Apocalypse. It's Clan Akaba, who the Ferguson family, well, not the Slade family, is in charge of that, and then most of them die. And at the ending, it reveals that the last surviving member is set up with a prostitute with the last name Ferguson, which is Blink's last name. And he had teleportation powers, and a cop called Jonathan Starsmore who breathes fire, which is very useful when you're fighting vampires. And I vaguely remember it, but I remember liking it, and did not have much Apocalypse, just lots of vampires and descendants of Apocalypse in it.
Well, you've actually made it seem really interesting. I'm actually going to track it down now because I actually do want to read it now.
Same. I wasn't interested in it at all, and now I mean.
Now I'll go track it down and read it now.
Okay, so I think after that, but you all can check on that because I haven't tracked down every vampire thing I could find. I just remember those I've read. But I think after that, we're going to the Course of the Mutants event, which is there's one more thing.
There's at least one more, and it's more X adjacent than it is X-Men. Captain Britain and MI13 shows Captain Britain, Spitfire, Wisdom, and the rest of that team facing off as the vampires try to take over England. And I think that was my first introduction to vampires as a vampire nation, as a organized force, which is then seen again in Curse of the Mutants, where they're this kind of militarized army of vampires. And it also showed Dracula to be Islamophobic, as he actively was against Excalibur, whose real name I'm blanking on, since she was a Muslim, and that he actively went after her family for that very purpose.
That was a really good. I really loved the MI13 series, but that last arc, especially, I think they were venting a lot. They got some real hate over Excalibur, the character, and that she was Muslim and that she's wielding Excalibur seemed to really offend some, supremacist types. They did that arc. They also brought in Dr. Doom, and so he's also bigoted against Doom, and for ethnic reasons, Doom is not going to ally with them because of things like that. And so they were able to play with a lot of racial things with vampires and that kind of aristocratic, pure blood sort of stuff in ways that a lot of the vampire use doesn't always get to. But I think actually would play really well in with X-Men stuff, because if there's one thing X-Men is good for, it's that it should be good for, is that pure blood stuff doesn't really work out, right? I can't say with Krakoa. I think for me they go a little too far into that sort of realm themselves. But I would have liked to see a X-Men or mutant and vampire arc that dealt with that the same way that the MI13 did.
I would love that too. Also, more Excalibur. She should.
Yeah.
That was an awesome character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think we've seen her since Secret Wars.
She showed up somewhere after, but I'm completely blanking on what it was. Was Hydra Cap after Secret Wars?
I can't remember, to be honest.
She showed up there. I just know that much.
Okay.
And Valkyrie. She was just recently in Valkyrie, Jane Foster.
Okay.
There we go. I knew I saw her.
Oh, that's cool. I was gonna read Valkyrie someday. No, you both gave me very much interest in reading that run with Islamophobic vampires and everything. And okay, so the next is Years of the Mutants. I'm right. And well, how do I sum up this? So, so the premise is that if I'm not wrong, that Dracula is dead, or like either supposedly he's dead, or someone killed him. I don't remember what was the like big premise, but then vampires started to become, like Gabriel said, extremely militarized and decided that they were gonna make people believe more in their cause, which is probably making more vampires, by throwing a bomb, and that bomb turned people into vampires, and that happened with Jubilee, and that's how we got some of the best writing we have in Jubilee, thanks to these terrorist vampires. So thank you, terrorist vampires. And and well, after that, I mean, there's a lot of stuff going on. The thing with Gambit and Storm going to what has happened with Dracula, if I'm not wrong. At some moment, he come back to life. I read it like 5 years ago, so I'm trying to think from memory. And okay.
I was going to say, in preparation, I actually started rereading Curse of the Mutants. That's how I found that lovely picture of vampire giant squid that Namor fights under the ocean, which is ridiculous in an awesome way. Dracula gets killed by his second son, and then his second son goes after the mutants. And Storm and the Gambit have to go to the vampire island to retrieve Dracula's body. And
part of it.
And Namor has to go visit the Atlantis vampires in order to reclaim Dracula's head.
Yes, and in the meantime, you've got Jubilee, who's now slowly turning. She decides to run away, and she ends up joining. It's Saris. That's Dracula's son. His name's Saris, the ex. And from there, things kind of degenerate. So they end up biting Wolverine, which, no spoilers, something else happens towards the end. That's sort of the main story, but there's a lot of really cool spin-off things that come. There's a lot of one-shots. I mean, you're talking about Storm and Gambit. There's also there's one called X-Men versus Vampires, and it's got a whole bunch of shorts in it, and that includes a short about rock slide. And there's, I mean, I posted the picture today in one of the Facebook groups. I mean, there's a mutant whale, a vampire whale. I mean, it turns out that it's part of a dream eventually. It's not actually, it turns out that it's Santo having delusions of grandeur and dreaming about rescuing and being the hero of the X-Men. Meanwhile, he's been stuck on a boat to peel potatoes or something ridiculous like that. But there's a lot of like great little spin-offs that come out of that series. And in fact, some of the spin-offs are actually better than the main arc. I mean, I think my favorite thing about the main arc is I mean, yeah, Wolverine gets bit, and then all of a sudden he's on the vampire side, and blah blah. And the art's pretty good, and Blade's involved, but it's the fact that they have to put the X-Men have to put Dracula his body back together again to help them deal with the Sun who's about to attack Utopia. Because it basically they don't win the fight. It ends because Dracula steps in and stops his son. Because Scott makes a deal. That's the gist of it for me at any rate.
My favorite thing about Curse of the Mutants was my favorite thing about many things in the Utopian era, and that is the smart use of the large cast of characters that they have. They have Husk stalking the streets of San Francisco, being a vampire slayer because she is able to be a literal person made of wood. Then they have an entire front line of people who I forget what they call them. I think it's the tough skin.
Yes, they call them the tough skins. Yes.
Yeah, because they can't be bitten. Like I know there's Bling, I know there's Mercury, Colossus, I believe Armor. And it's all these people who, due to their mutation, they can't be turned because a vampire can't get their fangs into them. And it's and it's just a smart use of having such a large cast of characters.
And in the big battle scene later on, towards the end of that arc, they get used as sort of like the battering ram into all the vampires because they can't be hurt. I mean, I remember that specifically.
I think I like some of the shorts a lot. The actual main arc of it felt like one of those battle card games where people are just slapping down cards on top of each other, and I blur on a lot of it because of that. I think there's not enough. There's cool moments and there's cool matchups, but there's not a lot of development or planning or character stuff. And so I've read it at least once all the way through, probably more, and it just all blurs together.
Well, in a way, I kind of like that because they are using so many characters, but the only character that has real growth in it is Jubilee. And I think that the fact that there's a lot of just moments for the other characters, it helps not detract that from her.
Okay.
Because in the end, while it is an X-Men story, it can be boiled down then to a Jubilee story. And there is nowhere near enough of those out there.
I think, go ahead. I think the stories that come from Jubilee after that, out of that, are some of the best Jubilee stories that you will absolutely ever read in the entirety of X history. I mean, the Wolverine and Jubilee mini, and then there's stories later where she goes off with another vampire, and I cannot remember the character's name. I remember he wore red. That's all I can remember. It's bugging me, but those are some of the best Jubilee stories you will actually read of her dealing with her new situation and who she is.
Vamp Jubes is the best Jubes.
Yeah.
I also remember it's true that it wasn't very character focused, but there was one episode that was very character focused, and for me was brilliant, and it was about Dr. Kavita Rao, and I'm not sure if you also include Nemesis or not. I don't remember that.
Blood and Shadows.
Yes. It was done by C.S. Spurrier, the writing. I need to remember who did the art because the art is amazing. Gabriel Hernandez Wala. Well, I need to remember the name correctly. Wait. Gabriel Hernandez Walta did the art, and it was written by C.S. Spurrier, and it was very super character focused. It was two people talking about how they were gonna I guess undo vampirism and what things that pose as questions some of them were ethical, some of them were like, if we do this or this, I don't know, it was great. I remember it had some attack somewhere, someone attacked them and something happened, but mostly for me was the conversations between the two characters were great. And the art was amazing. It was very much character focused, and that's my favorite. That's what I remember as my favorite. And for the whole event, I like that vampires tried to bring out some mutant nationalism out of them. There was a moment where they were like, there was a discussion. I don't remember who was talking with who. I think the son of Dracula was somewhere, and he was telling the mutants that they must understand what they wanted to do, and it was very much a conversation about some sort of form on nationalism that for me was kind of cool, mostly because the position of the mutants was complex and the reaction to that was also complex. And I remember that that's kind of cool. But that's what I remember of the event, those two things.
One thing which I'm not a fan of Curse of the Mutants that I think I missed on the first read through is that Blade had a one shot that was tied into it, which was essentially Blade trying to gather the vampire slayers together as they were being executed. And there was one character that I don't think ever appeared before because Blade seemed unfamiliar with them, and their name was Dot. And the one piece about it that really set my teeth on edge is they refer to Dot as no one knowing Dot's gender and then giving Dot the pronouns it. And then the issue ends with Dot literally getting ripped to shreds by vampires, but everyone except Blade dies anyway. But it just seemed like a choice that I'm not a big fan of, particularly if they introduce Dot for this one issue only and for Dot to end that way. Not a fan. And Dot's whole main thing was that Dot was weird.
That's not cool.
Yeah.
Not cool, Marvel. Okay, so any more thoughts on the Cures of the Mutants?
Nothing except that it's the first time that they don't push the idea of the singular vampire. They push the idea of the vampire nation. And if you look at anything after that, that concept is held through all the way to now, to the latest Wolverine stuff in the Krakoa era. They're not dealing with the individual anymore. It's you deal with the vampire nation. It's what the vampire, and that theme is, since Curse of the Mutants, that theme is recurrent all the way through.
Well, I mean, it had come through in non-X stuff.
Yes, yeah.
80s, but yeah, definitely for X-Men and definitely militarized, because prior to that, it was usually more cult-like or families.
The clans.
Yeah.
Yes, correct.
Chasing after the Darkhold and so on through different books. But yeah, I think they definitely militarize with Curse of the Mutants.
Yeah, I think that idea is somewhat interesting because it's like very much about radical nationalism. I don't know to which extent, but I think it was interesting that it was put in the Curse of the Mutants stuff. It was put against the X-Men, and the X-Men were like, we don't like this, and I don't know. I like that. Especially because they were in Utopia, and a lot of stuff was about like making homogeneous the experience of mutants, and that thing diverted from that a lot. And the next stuff, okay, from here now we just flow with Jubilee, right?
Yep.
There's no like another main giant thing that is not about Jubilee. And well, there's a lot of cool stuff like what you all have said, the Wolverine and Jubilee stuff, the X-23 that I said earlier, and some stuff more. But I think one interesting that we already talked about, but not from the vampire point, is the Generation X one, mostly because the new Generation X one, mostly because it deals with something that was likely vampire, which was the villain of Generation X. I can't remember his name in English because in Spanish it's completely different. So you are gonna
M-plate?
M-plate. Okay,
Yes.
fine.
And then when M-plate is merged with M, they have the extremely original name of M-plate.
Them place.
I would like to think Bell planned that from moment for the names.
Yeah.
That's so funny. I think whoever wants to talk.
No, I can't. I didn't read the series.
Okay, so I think what they did with Monet in that run was a choice, in the sense that I didn't like it a lot. Mostly because for me it was like a bunch of horrible stuff happening to Monet, which suddenly, because horrible stuff happens to her, she's bad. And when that gets deconstructed and reversed, it's like the final issue. So it's like, it's like you have this narrative through all of it, and then in the final issue you throw it away. But
sorry. So what I do want to say is, to be fair to the writer of Generation X, which I think was Christina Strain.
That is correct.
What happened with Monet was something that was already done. It happened in, I want to say, Uncanny X-Men with Magneto. That might as well have been an Uncanny X-Force since it read that way. And then the series ended just kind of leaving Monet merged with M-plate.
Yeah, that is.
And I went into the series knowing that, and I think that knowing that she was already presented with this problem of we need M back, or we can get M back, I think she did a good job doing that. But I also feel I have this feeling that she might have been mandated to just start undoing stuff, because that's also when we get Jubilee returning to a non-vampire form herself.
Last issue, isn't it?
Exact. Yep.
Last issue, last page.
Second to last issue, last page.
Second to last issue.
And in the vein of undoing things, that's also when Quentin Quire lost the last of the Phoenix Force.
And it's in the last issue, in the almost last page, when Blink and Mercury hold hands for a moment.
I think they just stand next to each other, dude. I think you just made that up. They're just standing close to each other, and we just want them to be holding hands.
I'm gonna screen cap that someday.
I like that run. I like that, that series a lot. But I also remember that they were really harsh on M in that series.
Yes.
The characters. There's a lot of, especially for X characters who have all been possessed or all done some melodramatic, thing where, Colossus' sister dies, and so he goes and becomes a terrorist for 7 issues. They've all done something, but they're really harsh in their judgment of her.
I mean, she's just kind of chilling in the subway eating people, though. Like, she's just like in a subway car eating morons. And no one ever talks about that after that series, and just munching on homeless people. It's weird.
Yes. I mean, I think the series was harsh on her because she was not doing this for herself. Like, she was being possessed. But yes, it was very much demonizing. Like, it was a bunch of layers of demonizing with the Morlock stuff and everything. I love that run. Same. I love most of it. I'm just weird about how it treats M, and this is a vampire stuff, and that is kind of vampiric. But it also had this great thing about Jubilee being a mom, which I love, especially when she was a vampire. Because the vampire thing in Jubilee pretty much stand up for, something like addiction, maybe some other thing, maybe mental health issues, maybe etc. And it was like she was a great mom, aside even if that, and that's great because that's not usual. And yet, yes, it's metaphoric. It's not the same as putting it out literally, but I like that a lot. I found that very great in her character. Like she was a great mom while being a vampire.
And they did a good job showing the interaction between the two. It was in that It was in that series that Shogo first saw Jubilee as a vampire, with fangs out, whole 9 yards, and how she dealt with that, and how Shogo dealt with that, even though he was a baby. And I thought it was really well handled.
And personal issues with the writer aside, when Jubilee was in Patsy's comic, aka Hellcat, it really brought in, and that was an attempt in a ways to do a comic that embraced all the different parts of the Marvel universe. And so she was both the mutant character, but she was also the vampire character. And it let her kind of relax in a way, because it wasn't an X-Men team, it was a hanging out group. And so we got to see Jubilee, the mall rat again kind of thing. Jubilee, the
casual,
while she's still a vampire, which we didn't necessarily get with the X-Men teams, because the X-Men comics, they have to fight somebody, pretty every issue.
I didn't know she appeared in the Hellcat series, and now I'm very intrigued.
She's the intern, or she's sitting at the front desk basically, and out for karaoke with them and so on. And she's kind of very feeling her vampireness, so she's not taking anything from anybody.
Yeah, it sounds like it's new Jubilee and old Jubilee kind of mixed together in a nice, fun way.
It was more fun, I think, than some of the other portrayals, which I like as well, but it was very heavy in some of the X books. And so it was nice to have that counterbalance of, okay, over here she can have fun.
That's great. I think Vampire Jubilee is one of my favorite X characters.
She also got full pants.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
like regularly got full pants. She didn't need to wear those, like 13-year-old like short shorts.
The short shorts. The short shorts.
Her shorts are good enough. They're always cuffed up too. They're always folded up.
Cuffed.
Yeah.
Yep.
I found it interesting that the first time she showed up in an X book after she was cured of her vampirism, they put her right back in those shorts. But the entire time she was a vampire, she got to wear pants.
That's the privilege of being a vampire. You can wear pants. Yeah, I think that was great. Mostly because, with what Travis said about a lot of the books being dark, I really appreciate that they chose that she was an adoptive mom over that in the middle of all this dark story, because it was like, something that people usually would have failed, and it didn't fail at all. And that's great. I don't know. I found that great. Like with what I say before about a Storm character in Blue Storm being like someone that is still a Storm and that is responsible and etc. I found that great because a lot of times a vampire comes as a metaphor for something that people usually don't like in other people. It kind of deteriorates them a lot, and I feel that's great that it doesn't happen that much. It can happen a little because they're humans and they make mistakes like everyone else, but I don't know. That's something I like a lot about Vampire Jubilee, that it was very heavy sometimes and very wow, but she was taking very big responsibilities, not only being a mom, because she was also a teacher. And like a lot of stuff that was very cool for someone that was struggling with something as vampirism, which doesn't mean anything in concrete, but can mean a lot of things.
Yeah. And another thing is, while that was all happening, she also, I think for the first time, she was a full-fledged X-Men member and treated like a full-fledged X-Men member. She wasn't the X-Men sidekick. She was a valuable part of the team. She even led a mission or two where she was the one in charge, and it was very much Jubilee got to be a grown-up and a contributing member of the X-Men and not a punchline.
And this might be a reach of them because it has nothing to do, but it reminds me of when Daniel Moonstar lost her powers, and that didn't stop them from giving her responsibilities and places. And she was really struggling with that. That was not a non-issue, it's an issue, a very heavy issue. But it's not like they just make this person like incompetent in certain ways that is usually understood as making that. Like she lost her powers, now she's going out of the books. Like the opposite. She was like fighting a legion with, I think it was an arc or something.
Yes, she got the bow and arrow with her foot.
Yes.
That one picture. And that is like an iconic image, in my opinion. Yeah. I mean, the one thing that does bug me with, Jubilee is that I like when she's treated as an adult. The minute she's been around way too long to be regressed to the mall rat. Yes, that'll always be part of her history. And there's a fun thing in the Christmas X-Men annual where she goes back to the mall and da da da. But it needs to be left behind. She's an adult. She's a mom. Those are the themes that need to be explored. And I think Howard's doing a good job of that in Excalibur. To be quite honest with you, I'm done with the mall babe thing. It's over. Yeah.
The Christmas issue, they did a good job. It's like, okay, she's a mall rep, but she's also an adult, and kind of finding what the footing is.
Yeah, and she was giving her son some of her history. You know what I'm saying? There was some nostalgia involved. You know what I'm saying? But nostalgia is good for 4 pages, and then let's move on. You know? Yeah. And then after that, I mean, I can think of odds and sods vampire-wise. I mean, Gail Simone's second arc, there's Morbius is involved and there's some vampires there, but there's no depth to that. It's more fun, and it's a hell of a fun arc, but there's no real depth to that. And that brings us back to Wolverine recently. I mean, unless there's something I'm missing. And quite frankly, the thing with the vampires, it was spread over 2 issues, if I remember correctly, and quite honestly, it was filler going into the next. I mean, they had this whole interesting idea of Wolverine's blood and the vampires using it to walk around during the day, but it's just, and they had the vampires of got Omega Red doing work for them by being inside Krakoa, but it's gone nowhere. It gets cut off at the knees in 2 issues, and left alone. I mean, I don't know if we'll see anything come of that later on.
Yeah.
But I mean, it does bring back the whole vampire theme and the vampires living up north where it's dark and it's permanently night, etc., etc. But there's nothing beyond that. There's no change. There's no additional characterization. They cannon fodder for claws.
Well, I mean, Wolverine has a few stories where we deal with vampires, but they're all pretty much either done in 1 or 2 issues.
Yeah.
Bloodstream will come in once in a while and try to get Wolverine to kill him. And it was the sword he had, right? Wolverine had a sword that would kill the vampire, I think. And
yes.
I don't know. Eventually, he probably did get killed. And then there was the What If, where Wolverine becomes king of the vampires.
Yeah, there were 2 versions of that. So there was Wolverine becomes king of the vampires, and then there was What If Wolverine was king of the vampires during Inferno.
Okay.
Which was completely bananas. but I mean, complete. I mean, and the whole idea there is that Wolverine has got an indomitable will, so that when Dracula bites him, he has no power over him whatsoever, and he ends up taking Dracula out. And I like that. I like that idea. It comes back to the same as with Storm, is that Dracula can't hold sway over because of her powerful will. And I like that idea. Except with Wolverine, it's more like, and I mean, if you've read those issues, he's very gruff, and he's like, "Oh, you bit me, now I'm going to kill you." Shoop. And then he goes about conquering the world. You know what I'm saying? And things go very, very wrong for him eventually. So yeah, there's those. Yeah, I mean, those are fun, but they don't mean much in canon. If we look at the other horror stuff, that there's a lot of other horror stuff in Wolverine. If you pick through all the series, there's some really excellent one-offs. There's an annual I picked up recently, which is brilliant horror, but it's not vampire related. But there's this house, and there's this person that lives in this house, and Wolverine crash lands there. But this person is not a person; it's an extension of another body that lives in the basement. It's really it's amazing horror. I just cannot for the life of me remember who wrote it, but there's some and then Wolverine goes to hell, and we've had Wolverine dealing with demons, and we've had Wolverine dealing with ghosts, and we've had all of that stuff. I mean, there is some really good horror inside Wolverine's comic. I mean, the idea, if you think about X-Men are monsters. They're acceptable monsters, but they're monsters at the end of the day. So in theory, if you think about it, X-Men is a horror comic in its own way. And I'm talking too much again.
No, keep going. I was thinking about the Nightcrawler series, his first ongoing, which was, I think, I don't know if upset is the right word, but it confused a lot of people by being explicitly gothic horror.
Yes.
Such as it was. I think, I know a lot of X-Men readers were not necessarily ready for that.
No.
But rereading it, I think it is a very strong series. I understand why it only lasted the 12 issues and gets canned. I think it is a very strong series.
I don't remember it a lot, but I think I loved it. What was it about?
When was it?
It basically sets up Nightcrawler as a paranormal investigator. And so he is investigating, I think, child murders in the first one.
Yep.
And, the devil. And it brought in, what's her name now? His stepsister, who is also his girlfriend.
Oh, the other magic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Amanda Sefton.
Amanda
Sefton. Yeah.
Yeah.
I always confuse her with someone. I don't know with one. In the pages, there's always like too much blonde women around. Excalibur and
For reasons I can never explain, I always confuse her with Amelia Valt, and I don't know why. They have nothing to do with each other.
It's a very kind of generic look, I think, unfortunately. And I like some comics with her. Some I like a lot, but it is a very generic look. I think during that ongoing, she actually has her mother's look when she's in the Hell Dimension that she's ruling.
The Winding Path, or whatever it's called.
It doesn't really communicate well there either. Like, there are moments where you're like, is it her? Is it her mother? And then like, no, it's her. She just has her mother's look for some reason.
She was the magic. Like she was called magic for a whole mini, and that was very confusing. There's a mini of the X-Men that is called X-Men Magic, and it doesn't have Ileana anywhere. It's all about this person. And I bought it when I was very young, and I was like, I want my money back. And
They tricked you.
yes, no, but it was not bad. It's a great, especially the art is awesome. But yes, it was magic for a while for some reason. Probably because she was the queen of Limbo.
Yeah. So you bringing her up reminds me of what still sticks out to me as one of the creepiest. I don't know if it classifies as horror issues that I've read, which was X-Men Unlimited. I want to say 19. And it was a Nightcrawler story, in which case Kurt had Ileana's soul sword, so they tortured and sacrificed every member of Nightcrawler's old circus.
Okay.
In order to get to him, and it was just one of the creepiest openings I have ever seen to a comic. But if you ask me how it ended, I can't tell you. But I can explain the beginning and how everyone was dead.
Well, it's like, broad horror. I'm still in shock over Micronauts X-Men. And the fact that they did it and got away with it, because in that series, and it was co-written by Claremont,
Yes.
who prepped it with a thing in Uncanny where Xavier was out in space and he sent out some part of him, which becomes a different character who comes back to Earth, possesses himself, and proceeds to do things like sexually assault Danny in the issue very graphically. And then eventually they're fighting this character they think is not Xavier, who's possessed Xavier, and then Xavier has to admit to himself, it's me, I've possessed myself and done these horrible things. And it's a toy tie-in for a children's toy.
Yep.
And it will never be addressed again.
And it's horrific. It's horrific.
I think another character, a villain, possesses Kitty at some point. She runs around in a swimsuit and he basically admires, like, look at me, I'm a 14-year-old girl in a swimsuit.
Yep.
It's really, I don't know if they meant it to be that disturbing, but this freaked me out as a kid and continue, like, to this day, if you ask me, like, what's the scariest, X-Men comic or the most disturbing, it's that miniseries.
Yeah.
I'm still trying to wrap my head about Xavier possessing Xavier, but it's not Xavier because it's Xavier, and I'm just lost.
It's very weird. And
I need like a graph or something, a chart to make sense of if it's Xavier or not, even though Xavier himself is a creep.
It's not as dark, but one of my favorite one-shot horror stories. I can't remember the issue right now, and I'm very mad at myself about that, because it's my favorite New Mutant issue of the first volume. And it's one that Luis Simonson did, that is, the cover art is all of the New Mutants in their graveyard with their names on it.
Yes, I can see it.
And it's basically, if I remember correctly, because I have reread that in some years, it's basically a nightmare. I'm not sure if it was of Magneto. I think it was of Magneto, but I'm not sure if it's clear within the issue or if it's like a collective nightmare or something like that. But it's like a nightmare which we are left to think it's a collective nightmare at some point, in which they all went about their days with very, very visible post-traumatic stress disorder and depression over their people, their close people dying, and etc. And then at the end of the issue, they get into the graveyard and it horrifies me, but it's great. For me, it's like one of the greatest uses of horror for making a standalone for other thing that bothers you, for other thing that, I don't know, I like it a lot. And it's also one of the closest, one of the issues that has Daniel and Rane romantically very close a couple of times, which was great. Those two things are great.
Yeah, that's issue 38 of New Mutants 1. It's Rick Leonardi penciled, Sinkovich inked, Claremont on writing, Glynis Wine doing the colors. That's got the graveyard cover. It's called Aftermath. That was the name of the issue. It's called Aftermath.
I knew it was 50-something, but I didn't know which one. But yeah, it was that's my favorite, like, X-Men related horror stuff. Even if it's not very horror, like, the concept is very haunting to me. Also, I read it when I was like 14, so I was very like, wow. When I have read it, it has not been as scary, but I remember that feeling of like, some days could be like that or something like that, and it's very like, wow for me. So that's the one I'm going to. But New Mutants in general has all of the stuff that it's very close to horror, and it's great. Like the Demon Beer saga is very close to horror. It's not horror, but it's very close to it, especially the visuals. And I think those are great.
I've forgotten too, but Golgotha really, when that came out, that freaked me out. That was when the X-Men go to investigate something, and they bring back an alien life form that's a kind of fungus. and it makes them all hallucinate and have anxiety nightmares. And so X-Men are thinking they're hooking up with other X-Men that they want to, but then they feel guilty about it. And Emma Frost tries to give herself a facelift with a pair of scissors because she suddenly gets very worried that she's aging too quickly, and they basically have to take the scissors away from her. It was very intense, and I like that as that run went on, they didn't shy away from that. That arc kind of fueled, because everybody's anxieties were out in the open then. It was very clear what people thought of themselves. And so a lot of the rest of that run was dealing with then things that got revealed during those very scary, very tense few issues, which also had a race riot of mutants in Los Angeles. Mutants rose up in Los Angeles and started killing non-mutants in that arc as a result of the same fungus. And so you had the X-Men having to stop some of them, but also being very sympathetic of, these are very real fears. They're very real anxieties. The leader of that riot was a pool boy who they called Boy and were very condescending to, and very, it was she to have their mutant who lived in the, pool house kind of thing. And so the X-Men were very sympathetic to that, but at the same time, you can't go around murdering people and setting fire to the city, kind of. So,
I mean, on that thing that Travis said, I want to ask you all. I was asking because ask this because I think it's fun. What do you all think Mutant Comics could do with horror right now, or with vampires? But I'm gonna go more on the branch of horror. On my idea, I have an idea, and Gabriel, you can't do a Richter and Sarah in Orlando right now. It's just not fitting.
I mean, you could make that horror if you tried hard enough, but I'll come up with something else.
It's just something that you all would like to see.
As we were talking, one thing I realized is that there has been a focus on horror for the kids, of whoever the kids are at that time. New Mutants had a lot of heavy horror focus. Generation X, we spoke about a few of those with the vampires. I still remember, and while it may not be horror, I think it was still pretty creepy when Adrian Frost made all of Generation X relive the deaths of Emma Frost Hellions. The new X-Men get sent to hell, which is how Pixie ends up getting a soul dagger. And I would like to see more of that. The utilizing of these teenage heroes and putting them in these situations where maybe the adults wouldn't believe or wouldn't understand what is going on. And I would love to see it happen with the actual younger mutants, whether it's some of the Academy X kids or even going younger, how we have Maxim and Manon, we have the Tengu twins, we have Honey Badger or Scout, we have Molly Hayes, we have all of these mutant kids that are not being utilized, and I think a good horror vibe would be great for them.
Anyone else has ideas? I think that was pretty good.
Thank you.
Those are my favorite comics for real. Like, if I look back at them, those are my favorites.
Well, I think X-Force is already pushing the body horror thing. It's really pushed the body horror theme, especially with Joshua Cassara on art. The opening arc with them going to look for Domino, and the little men that burst out of other little men when you kill them, etc., etc. So, I mean, I think that they've gone quite heavy on the body horror there, but and then you had the monster in the temple, etc., etc. So I think they are weaving in quite a few horror elements into X-Force already. I just don't think they've pushed it to where it could go. I mean, I'd like to see the team deal with something completely sort of out of their the X-Force is always the, hey, you guys, let's go get him team, and that's fine. But I'd like them to be put in a situation where their abilities aren't necessarily going to help them with the situation they're in. So something with ghosts or spirits, etc., that could be interesting. Especially, you have Forge, and Forge is a shaman. Or has acted as a shaman before. So that could be interesting. Once we move past all the swords and stabbing and killing
and isn't Beast theoretically a wizard now because of the whole?
Well, that was 05 Beast.
Yeah,
theoretically they've been merged, and he should actually know magic, but he's too busy being a dick.
Yeah.
So that seems to be his current. His job is to be the team.
He can be a dick. He can be a wizard dick. Let's have Beast be a wizard dick.
That could be interesting, and you could throw. Yeah, but I think what they're doing, they've compartmentalized the books a little bit. So the magic stuff is really going on in Excalibur. They've kind of not really letting it bleed into the other books. They kind of boxed it out a little bit. But I think once this event's over, there is room for that, definitely.
Yeah, I would like to see, whether it's with pre-existing characters or concepts, or new vampires, new werewolves, or whatever, just more of that kind of thing in an X-Men story to kind of open up the X-Men again, so that it's not as strict as some of the X-Men. Like, there are certain X-Men stories they kind of retell. There are certain approaches to the themes of X-Men that I think they revisit a little too much. And it might be nice to see the X-Men as a mutant minority, but dealing with, vampires just as a vampire story, and not necessarily as a minority or culture comparison, which is fine. Curse of the Mutants did that. It's good that they did that. But to see it just as a genre story, there's strength in that, especially because the X titles all tend to be fairly diverse, or should be, at their best, fairly diverse in other ways that we don't necessarily get that with Captain America. It's always going to be Captain America doing it, right? Fantastic Four, it's pretty much always 4 straight white people, or 3 straight white people in Johnny Storm doing whatever. And with X-Men, there's a better chance that, as we saw as soon as they brought Dracula in, it's immediately a Storm story. And that is probably the first time that a Black woman got bit in a Marvel comic, or leaned over and bit anyone else. It might be the first time a Black woman put her lips on anyone in a Marvel comic. So there are opportunities there that I think they could explore more.
Yeah, I'll agree with that. Because Bloodstorm really got mistreated through Blue.
Yes.
And then in Extermination, they just decided, well, goodbye, and she's gone. I can kind of, on one hand, if I play devil's advocate, I can say, well, in the current era, where would there be a place for that character? You can argue that. But at the same time, she got shortchanged big time with Extermination.
Yeah. They could have written her off some other way.
Yeah, it was really
and the way they did.
Yeah, it was really cheap. I didn't like it at all.
I think it's also worth mentioning that with the current state of things and the acknowledgement of the rules of Krakoa, Bloodstorm's one of the only official X-Men that will never be resurrected, because they have a rule against alternate version people being resurrected. I think it's just her and Joseph are the only ones that have been shafted to just stay dead forever.
Which is such a weird, judgmental, you're mutant and you're going to try these.
And Maddie is also not getting resurrected.
But I think that's going to change. I think Maddie's going to come back, but Maddie also never made it as an
they left that up in the air. The conversation between Scott and Alex is deliberately left obtuse.
Yeah, it's like they're tabling it.
Scott doesn't answer. Doesn't say anything.
I have dropped off of X Factor, but from previous podcasts, I was very upset with Aurora being pulled off to fuel that first issue. Just because she hasn't been around at all in anything for quite a while, and then you're going to bring her back so she can die, off panel kind of thing, and they can say, well, we're not going to resurrect her. Maybe we will. I don't know.
She's her right now. She's in the book.
Yeah, she's back and she's part of the team.
Yeah, they brought her back. But they used it cheaply right at the beginning.
Cheaply at the beginning, and I don't know the last X death that I really enjoyed or really appreciated. Like, I can't think of one in the last years that felt.
Yeah, I'm kind of traumatized with what they've done to Santo now, because I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, what is this character now? I mean, this character is not, he's something new. He's not dead. He's not alive. He's not the old character. What are they going to do with it? I mean, there's a lot of speculation they're going to do it with Storm later on, but they're not, because the solicits, unfortunately, roll so far ahead. We already know that she's in the King in Black and she's Storm. So,
but we know that there's Storm, and we know that Storm looks like Storm, but hypothetically, it could be like Santo, just a Storm who happens to look the same. And I kind of feel like that's what's going to happen to a few characters, and that's why most of them, with the exception of I think Cypher has shown up on covers and Solits, it might just be that they're not who we think they are.
Maybe.
But yeah, I'm kind of with you guys where the deaths, I can't think of one where I've been, I don't want to say excited about a character dying, but like really felt like it went well. I think the last one might have been Nightcrawler. But I'm also a bit desensitized due to the Rosenberg massacres. And I'm very conflicted about the most recent death in X Factor and how I feel about it. It came off as kind of like intentional, like she wanted to die to get X Factor there, and that skirts way too close to suicide glorification for my comfort. But I don't think that's where Leah Williams wanted to go with it, so I'm very conflicted with how I feel about it. Duna, are you muted? I see your mouth moving, Duna, but I don't hear words.
Sorry, I muted myself and I didn't realize. Okay, so after that, my idea, I don't have a concrete idea. I like what they have done, which touches a little bit on horror in Hellions, like the bit with Maddie, and I like it a lot, especially because the protagonists are people that we or the reader tends to think as overt or as crazy. So it's well done that they're the point of view of a story. So that was great for me. I don't want to spoil what happens, but it's pretty much into the psychological horror branch of it, and I like that. I hope Hellions does that in the future too. Seth Wells, please. And also, I would love to, in the future, whenever that could be, to read a horror series with X-Men by Vita Ayala, because I think Vita has done incredible horror in the wilds, and I'm thinking where more, but that's like super. Morbius was great, but was not exactly like super horror. But the Wilds was very horror, and it's great. It's a Black Mask Studios comic, and I think they would do a great, like, I don't know if vampires, I don't know if other thing, but something bringing some internal fears about things they think about themselves to X-Men characters, and they already kind of did that a little bit on Prisoner X, but there was a lot of them there, and that was not the main them. And I don't know, that's what I would be very excited about in the scenario of things as how it is now, things that could be possible.
Maybe we'll get really lucky, and that's what we'll get when they take over New Mutants.
Oh, that would be great. I didn't realize that there was a possibility, right, happening
Yeah.
really. But yeah, that would
And
be great.
particularly with it being characters like Moonstar and Rain, I think Rain's in there still, and Warlock and even Scout, I think that they have great horror potential.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe I'm talking about a book that is gonna be out.
Maybe you're a precog. Don't tell Moira.
Just in case I'm spoiling something without realizing. Okay, so I think that was it. I think it was great and pretty dark, and I hope everyone liked the show. We're doing a few more shows as always, and the next one are gonna be on Disability and the X-Men, and the one after that, it's gonna be on Exos Wars, because we have to talk about that also because it's happening. It's gonna be finished when we do the show. I made it so.
Great.
And in the next one, we're gonna have a guest, but I'm not gonna announce it yet, just to be
Surprise.
mysterious.
Mysterious.
That was worth it. Okay. So thanks everyone for coming watching, and you all for coming have this talk. I enjoyed it a lot. And bye.
Bye.
Bye.